Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, and the corruption of man and the corruption of language. Ralph Waldo Emerson made the connect when he wrote that the corruption of man is followed by the corruption of language. When simplicity of character and the sovereignty of ideas is broken up by the prevalence of secondary desires, the desire of riches, of pleasure, of power, of praise, and duplicity and falsehood take the place of simplicity and truth, the power over nature as an interpreter of the will is in a degree lost. New imagery ceases to be created, and old words are perverted to stand for things which are not. And isn't that a description of what has happened to our language and thus our culture in America? Well, somebody who is particularly persnickety about language, that is in part his business, is John McWhorter, who teaches linguistics, American Studies, and music history at Columbia University. He's a contributing editor at The Atlantic and host of Slate's Lexicon Valley podcast. We've talked about his work a number of times on the show, and at the end of the last hour, you heard my recent commentary on him for townhall.com. His new book is showing the potty mouth side of John McWhorter. 9 nasty words, English in the gutter, then, now, and forever. Because of the George Carlin rule, most of these words we can't repeat, but an interesting read as a McWhorter work always is. Regardless, John McWhorter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
What about that observation by Emerson, the corruption of man followed by the corruption of language? Is that a fair description of what has happened in this country perhaps not exclusively, but at the hands of identitarian politics?
Dan, I'm sorry, but no.
Okay.
That's not what 9 Nasty Words is about. I am delighting in these words because the truth is that we're definitely a more informal culture. I mean, there was a time when you put language in its Sunday best in public and largely confined salty language to the private. That changed starting in the late 60s, and I don't know if we can ever go back. But as a linguist, for me, profanity is very subtle, it's very intricate, it's very complex. And so 9 Nasty Words is actually a book about not linguistic decline, but it's about delight in how complicated, say, the word that begins with F that, we're all so familiar with, how complicated its usage is, such that to learn English for real is to master something that really is as complicated as how you might use a word like even. What did she even mean? Try telling a foreigner what even means in that sense. It's subtle. The F word is used in an equally subtle way. And so what I just discussed is what used to be considered profanity, which was blasphemy. And then there are the parts of the body, and that's what we're all familiar with, the body and sex and excretion. And nowadays, profanity is slurs against groups. It's all about what a society happens to be hung up on. But I wanted to write a fizzy book about the words that we consider transgressive, how they got that way, and where they're going.
But what about when words are used to describe things that aren't? And so I think, for example, of saying that a man is a woman, or that that's a good example. I mean, just saying that something that is biologically not is linguistically it linguistically is. Is that a corruption of the language?
Well, in this case, I don't know if we're talking about language as much as we're talking about concepts and people wanting us to look at categories in a different way. That would be quite different from words that you use to transgress as gestures that are no longer words. And so in terms of using language to try to change people's minds and maybe even to be duplicitous, and frankly, I don't think of people talking about different gender categories as duplicitous, but that is just human. Part of why human language is so sophisticated is that we can actually try to get people to change their minds, or lie to people, or to say things that we know aren't true, which is something that comes along with language being so sophisticated. And then language is also sophisticated in that you can have something that's nominally a word, but is actually a gesture that actually takes flight from anything we would consider grammar and becomes a kind of decoration.
Do you think people use profanity to look tough? I mean, especially a lot of women, over the years, you've noticed that they start dropping the F bomb more, but are they trying to be like men or trying to be taken seriously?
Well, yeah, it's at the point where profanity isn't as male as it used to be. Because in general, in any modern society, men tend to be more vulgar in their speech than women. There are women who are, like vulgarity in speech. There are men who don't. But the tendency is that slanginess is more associated with men. That's been changing over the past several decades so that it would be harder to draw that line. There's studies that show that, especially younger women curse as much as men do. And that's because gender roles and gender conceptions are changing so quickly.
Do you think that contributes to coarseness in the culture, that the nature of dialogue? Obviously, you're suggesting not with some of these words, but even that sort of dialogue that now more that includes women more so than previously.
Well, definitely we are a more informal society than we used to be. And that would include what you might call coarseness. Many people would call it honesty. And so for many of us, there would be an aesthetic pleasure in watching, say, the people in old movies with their hats and, with their controlled way of speaking, with the sense that there was a public way of using language and then a private way of using language that you can barely see in those movies, even among the comedians. So yes, there is what you could call coarseness. I think many people would call it just real, and that's something that is happening with, men and women. That's the nature of modernity. Some people like it, some people don't.
Well, so then is this a concept or or corruption of the language, critical race theory, and the suggestion that all whites are oppressors and all blacks are victims?
Yeah, that is a very narrow view of what education is supposed to be. That's a very narrow view of what society is. And we have this cadre of people who are under the impression that that is more important than anything else and that all people need to focus on that. The way, for example, all people used to be told that they were to focus on God. It really is a religion. And unfortunately, everybody is afraid of those people because if you go against them, they call you a racist on Twitter. That's basically what it comes down to. If you tell them that they're wrong, they call you a racist on Twitter. And most people don't want to be called a racist on Twitter. But it means that those people are acquiring a disproportionate power when really they're extremely anti-intellectual, they're prosecutorial, and they are replacing one kind of racism with another one and teaching us that it's progress. It's a very dangerous development.
Yeah, and from your work, as well as a recent interview you gave to Bill Maher, you really bristle at the condescension at the foundation of books like White Fragility in particular, probably How to Be an Anti-Racist as well. And you write in your review of White Fragility last year in The Atlantic, which was devastating, by the way, and devastatingly in a good way. You write, White Fragility is, in the end, a book about how to make certain educated white readers feel better about themselves. I don't know if there's a bigger indictment, and would feel like a bigger indictment if you said that to one of those people that you're talking about. I wonder why that isn't simply put to those people that are exercising outsized control over K through 12 education and all other aspects of our civil society.
Well, all they see is that they are trying to seek the highest good, which is to battle power differentials. They don't often think of it that way, but for them, getting white people out of power is the most important intellectual, artistic, or moral endeavor possible. And so they're beyond any kind of constructive exchange. You cannot change their mind. They think they found a new God. And so what you have to do is either work around them, or you have to let them know that they're not going to get what they want by calling you a racist on Twitter. And I think they have taken such power so quickly that a lot of us are still just stunned and staggering trying to figure out what we're going to do. But yeah, to them, any criticism of white fragility, it's blasphemy. It's something that they just brush off of their shoulder. They can't imagine that the critique would be valid in any way. I know that Robin DiAngelo actually has said about me that she's Neil deGrasse Tyson and I'm an astrologer. That's her response to my criticism. She thinks she knows more in a way that I don't. And, so you can't reach that kind of person. But we have to get those people to sit back down at the table, because if we let them control the show, we're going back to the Middle Ages.
Well, right. And the key aspect of the approach that they take and you're sort of getting to it, is they will not engage you. And they cover it, like I've seen Ibram Kendi cover it by saying, to engage someone like John McWhorter or anybody who's critical of how to be an anti-racist is to legitimize their viewpoint, and their viewpoint is illegitimate, so it doesn't need to be addressed. It's a nice little artifice they use.
Yeah, for them, and I mean, you can put yourself in their minds. It's as if somebody is being asked to debate a pedophile. Like, is pedophilia okay? And we just figure, well, no, we have bigger fish to fry. To them, all of these things are that simple. I mean, to be honest, when you get down to Ibram Kendi, he's not the most reflective fellow in the world. He doesn't see these things with any kind of nuance or any kind of detail. And so, you have to work past him. We need to have a group of people who will conclusively, unfortunately, it has to be shout down people like that and tell them that some of their contributions are welcome, but that they can't run the show because what they're equipped with is not, sufficient to a modern society and how it can operate.
Right, but they don't want you running the show.
No, but it's at the point where if they learn that they can't get what they want by calling you a racist on Twitter, there'll be more room for the rest of us to start saying the things that we were saying before. All of us should be running the show, but certainly not them alone.
What's your reaction to governors moving, and most recently Texas, to ban critical race theory indoctrination from school curriculum? My take, and I want to get yours, is I appreciate the sentiment, but I think it's the wrong tactic. I don't want to be in the business of banning anybody. I want How to Be an Anti-Racist and White Fragility to have to do battle with John McWhorter and Shelby Steele and Glenn Lowry and others in the classroom. So my petition is, go ask your school boards, your teachers, your professors, why can't we include John McWhorter's work? Why can't we include Glenn Lowry's work? Why can't we include Thomas Sowell's work in this discussion of race and culture? And if they won't include it, then they have to explain why. If the actual principals, Kendi and D'Angelo to take two, won't engage, then force the work into the classroom where you're going to be confronted by both sides.
Yeah, I mean, to ban critical race theory often ends up meaning, in practice, no discussing race issues at all. And that's not what I think is at all constructive. We do need to talk about those things. And there are some school districts where things like that need to be discussed more than they were. What needs to be banned is the idea that texts like Robin DiAngelo's work and Ibram Kendi's work are treated as basic and sacrosanct and often the only ones that are really engaged. That is a sinful transmogrification of what an education is supposed to be. But we're having problems with terms, because critical race theory should not be taken to mean that race is never brought up in class. Critical race theory should mean that white fragility is not taken as the Bible.
John McWhorter, he teaches linguistics, American studies, music history at Columbia University. He's a professor there, of course. He is a contributing editor at The Atlantic, host of Slate's Lexicon Valley podcast, and someone who enjoys nasty words more than even George Carlin, I might suggest. Nine Nasty Words, English in the Gutter, Then, Now, and Forever is John McWhorter's new book. John, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Good luck with the book.
Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Strict attention to detail. That's what gives First Choice Equipment that winning edge and sets them apart from the competition. Covering Chicago, Northern Illinois, and Southeast Wisconsin, First Choice Equipment is the leader for Kubota and Gale construction equipment. At First Choice Equipment, they work alongside construction professionals who put their work boots on every day, providing them with a full line of skid steers, excavators, track loaders, and wheel loaders. To see the full line of equipment, visit firstchoiceequipment.com. First Choice Equipment is a trusted family-owned full-service construction equipment dealer. Their experienced team is dedicated to a customer-first attitude who anticipates and exceeds your needs in an ethical and professional manner. So stop in to see their full line of skid steers, excavators, track loaders, and wheel loaders. Or visit them online, firstchoiceequipment.com, to see their entire line of Kubota and Gale construction equipment. At First Choice Equipment, they're not just building your neighborhood, they're also